Take two. So the American War of Independence, 1775 to 1783. To what extent was war a cause of the French Revolution? So you should all have a narrative inside your head where you essentially think war causes debt. Debt is a core cause of disquiet and the appalling socio-economic situation in pre-revolutionary France. So therefore, yes, war is a definite cause of the French Revolution. We are going to have a more expansive and detailed look at this because there is a double bind in this argument which supports the significance of war as a causative agent in the French Revolution. So please understand, by 1776, Turgot had balanced the budget and reduced government borrowing costs. Okay, so he'd basically reduced government borrowing costs by 12% to 6%. However, he opposed American an American intervention in the French Revolution. He didn't want that. Okay, and because of this, he was sacked by King Louis. All right, so for basically balancing the books and thinking of economics first, he's punished by King Louis, which shows King Louis's lack of wisdom. All right, yet again. Now, moving on. The French intervention in the American War of Independence has a definite impact. All right. So, particularly at the Battle of Saratoga. Now, the French aren't there; they don't fight, but they supply most of the weaponry and the the musket powder. Okay, so they produce all of that and send it to the Americans and fund their war. Now, when they actually intervene, the Battle of Cheapscape, or Chesapeake in 1781. If the French hadn't intervened there, it's very unlikely that the American revolutionary forces would have won that battle. And that is seen really to be a kind of key turning point, the defeat of Cornwallis, the British general in charge. Okay. Now, when we look at this disastrous intervention because it caused so much debt, we kind of think, well, this is completely incorrect. But let me explain an underpinning philosophy, an argument for intervention at the time. So the French Foreign Minister, Vergennes, saw the war as a way to take the American colonies out of a British sphere of economic influence and bring it into a French sphere of economic influence. Okay, so you can completely understand the underpinning argument. However, despite the obvious friction between the British and the Americans, they did speak the same language. And they shared a common religion, Protestantism. So they had a similar culture, language, and religion. Now, in the long run, British trade with the colonies would continue. Okay? So whilst that seems kind of counterintuitive at the time, the French don't steal the trade and they do get in debt. Also, please remember, the America that you think of today isn't the American colonies back then. The American colonies, it wasn't the whole of America. It was just the East Coast, really, that had been occupied by European settlers, okay, who now thought of themselves as Americans after colonizing land that wasn't theirs. But anyway, let's move on. So the French owed a whopping 4.5 billion livres in debt. Okay, that's the French crown. So that's a huge amount of debt. Now, this is actually exacerbated by something that most people don't know about. It's called the Anglo-French War. The Anglo-French War was essentially a global naval war, which is very similar to the 7 Years' War. Okay, where they're fighting for influence against the most powerful navy in the world, the British Navy. Now, naval ships are very expensive. They're expensive to build, and they're very expensive if you lose them in battles. Okay, so this understandably causes a lot of debt for the French crown. Now, because of this exacerbating debt and the poor socio-economic situation which it creates in France, especially with wheat production. Okay, then if they're in this debt, how can they buy wheat from other countries? Okay, how can they do that? It becomes very difficult for them when food is so scarce. You can see the very poor situation that it creates. So then King Louis summons a States General, and we know this leads to the French Revolution. So yes, is war a direct causative agent, okay, of the French Revolution? I would argue a strong yes, okay? And actually there's a secondary argument, okay, which would cause me to argue yes again. Now, this argument is the influence of ideas. So in the Kingdom of France, we know that we had Montesquieu, and Montesquieu writes a very detailed political philosophy of a separation of powers between judiciary, executive, and a legislature. Now, this influences Thomas Paine, okay, in the American Revolution, and then he then returns to France and influences France. So you've got this influence, okay, from France to America to France again. So the American War of Independence was influenced by French thinkers, and then the French Revolution was influenced by American thinkers. So we got quite a kind of strange dynamic in an influence of ideas. However, we can clearly see that there is a strong influence. Between the American War of Independence and the French Revolution. Okay, I'm going to end on that note. Right, stop recording.